All right, good evening, everybody. It's Steve with Real Progressives. I'm going back. I think it's important to look backwards. And I remember what 2015 was like. And 2015 had a lot of people that believed in the mission. They believed in the cause. They believed in what was being done. And maybe I'm being naive here. But the belief that I had in our movement was never stronger than during 2015. I remember what it was like to see the polls show that the race had been called hours and hours before the state had even stopped elections going on. I remember the long lines in hot places like Arizona where people just didn't have any kind of help whatsoever in terms of trying to make democracy work. But I remember people suffering through the heat in these ridiculously long lines as they trimmed the polling places down to like next to none. But don't you remember how that was? Do you remember watching all the media stories come out and them acting like progressives were the bad people? Here we were for the first time in forever, energized with a purpose, with a direction, with goals, objectives, with a platform, with a leader of that platform that inspired, with people feeling like they had an opportunity to inspire and get involved. We had a real movement. People that weren't Democrats, people that weren't politically active, people that had never experienced anything before, got involved in the 2015 primaries. Well, a lot of that came crashing and burning at the DNC. Philadelphia was a very, very bleak time for many of us. I remember the riots crashing into the gates. I remember the film footage that we even took at Real Progressives of some of the insanity. I remember some of the delegates walking out. I remember Bernie Sanders' tears running down his face. And I remember the little mark on his cheek, and everybody said, oh, Bernie got beat up, that's why he did it. And people were bending over backwards trying to find rationale for what had happened. I mean, they couldn't make heads or tails of it. There was no long lines like that for Hillary Clinton. There were no long lines like that. There was no energy for Hillary Clinton. People hated Hillary Clinton. But there we were as a movement, empowered, energized, showing up, doing all the things they tell you to do. Yet somehow or another, they stole it from us. They used tricks. They unrolled people. They took away people's ability to vote. They made it impossible to vote. The media outlets made us all think that it was hopeless, but we dug in deeper. We fought harder. We looked the devil in the eye and said, no way are we giving in. And then when Bernie Sanders was strong-armed, quite frankly, had his talk with Obama, the look on his face, I'll never forget it. He was never the same after that during that time period. You could watch him going around with Hillary, and it was like, you knew he wasn't into it. There was no excitement. There was no enthusiasm. He couldn't stand her. He knew that she was a neoliberal in everything that he stood against. But he had made a pledge that he had to support the nominee. Even though the system was rigged, the elections were rigged, the DNC put their thumb on the scale, they ignored the will of the people. The bad guys won, if you want to call rigging an election winning. But I remember, and I still have some PTSD from all the gaslighting the mainstream media did to us. And I still have PTSD, quite frankly, from all the conspiracy peddlers in our midst that did the equal kind of distraction from within our ranks, that came up with crazy ideas. And it was like, what is truth? What is it that we believe? And I went through a period of time where the only thing I cared about was advancing modern monetary theory. Because I couldn't look at politics. I couldn't consider re-immersing myself into this theater when I didn't feel it was going to be fair, when I didn't feel like my voice mattered anymore. When I watched the ghouls trying to shave Aslan, I realized that we were up against something stronger than our hopes and prayers were ever going to solve. So I stopped believing that we could vote our way out of this problem. And I started believing the only way to solve it was a mass movement. I still believe a lot of that. But the problem is, the gaslighting is still going on today. Not a whole lot's changed. The difference is, instead of people uniting behind the same person that was lifting us up before, some have checked out and gone for lesser candidates with smaller visions. There's no movement there. There's no chance of anything happening. And yet now we watch as establishment candidates come out of the woodworks and drop out of the woodworks, leaving us with faux-aggressives, people that are giving us half measures. And we're being told by the media, we're being told by political operatives, we're being told by people that don't care to learn. All sorts of things to dumb down our expectations, to make us feel like anything that we really want is impossible. We have been led to believe that there's no point to any of this. And so you see good people that were once allies checking out, or you see good people buying into crazy nonsense. This is why I stopped caring about politics, because I realized that the more important thing was to educate and wake up the people. The people would make better choices if they knew better, I thought. But it's not always that way. People give up climbing Everest. They give up at the 5,000 foot mark, the 10,000 foot mark. They give up all the way up to the top. Some people keep going, but they look back, and the path to the top of Everest is littered with quitters, littered with people that didn't have what it took to get to the top, littered with people that had small visions and short-sightedness. And you realize that if everybody didn't get to the top, real change wasn't going to happen. And then, to cover their embarrassment and shame for not making it to the top, they castigate those that keep climbing. And so they eat their own, looking at people trying to keep this fight alive. And the crab's in the barrel continue to pull each other back in to make sure no one lives. This is the effects of gaslighting. It's also the effects of neoliberalism and the hopelessness that it breeds. I have spent every single day of my life since before Bernie Sanders announced his first run at the presidency, long before that, lifting up modern monetary theory to make people wake up. And I came to believe that the shackles of the mind were so intense that even a well-reasoned, let me show you how it works on the ledger, doesn't amount to a hill of beans with folks. You've got a bunch of reasons for that. Number one, they don't care. It's not an interesting subject to them. Number two, they think they already know it all. And they're not interested in hearing from you unless you've got a bunch of credentials, which I do. But I'm not an economist. So I had to deal with, show me your credentials. And then you have the next batch, which are the people that are so woke, they're useless. Everything is cynicism with them. They're not going to unite. They're not going to fight for anything. They're just there to cut your legs out from under you. And then lastly, the smallest bunch of them all, the people that are receptive to the message. Now here's the problem. The people that are just genuinely receptive to the message is so minuscule, is so small. Our circumstance is so dire today. All the gaslighting, all the infighting, all the petulance from small-minded dipshits. The peanut gallery and their time wasting and their spinning up all kinds of hate. The mainstream establishment, political operatives, diminishing your voice, all amounts to a very, very small group of people ever achieving the level of understanding that they need to be able to do great things, to be able to feel like they can unite and make a difference. It's terrifying when you realize that the tools of our destruction are purely psychological. The psyops that have been performed by both the government's arm, the media, by power brokers, plutocrats, corporate lords, and more perplexingly, the activist community. That whole apparatus, which is designed at the top to diminish our capacity to dream a better dream, to hope for more, to rally in our own defense, has become so powerful, so omnipresent, that people have stopped fighting for what matters and started turning this thing into a Lord of the Flies remake in real life. I can just see the people sticking Piggy, putting the war paint on. That's a distraction. That is precisely why our children are going to suffer. Part of it's the establishment. Part of it is the political operatives. Part of it is the media. Part of it is you and I. to get past that small group of people that are willing to hear, you've got to do extraordinary measures. Sometimes people have reframed the issues in such a way that people are ready to hear. Other times you can't expect the first shot to wake people up. Sometimes you need to play good cop, bad cop. Sometimes you need somebody to drop a bomb in the lake and bring the fish to the surface, and then have somebody more gentle and kind to bring them back to health. Bring the net in there, scoop them out, and nurse them back on into the game. And other times, people just aren't going to wake up. Hit or miss. Maybe they saw something written on the bathroom wall that made them think twice. Maybe they saw a video. Whatever it is, it's not happening nearly fast enough. It's not happening fast enough for us who are really in trouble, to survive. It may be fast enough for people that have stored a lot of money away or have a pension they're looking at. Maybe they're a little bit older. Maybe got the world by the short hairs. But for the vast majority of people, look at the stats. Most people don't have enough money to get through a week of unemployment. Most people don't have a week's worth of savings. Most people don't have $500 in the bank, much less any positive cash flow. Between student debt and just private debt mounting up, most people don't have time to think about the important things. They're just trying to survive, which to them is the most important thing in that moment. So you've got to ask yourself, not arrogantly, just to the point, how do we reach everybody in a timely fashion? How do we make enough of a splash? How do we make enough demands? How do we wake up a movement that has checked out, that has gone their separate ways, that think they have it going on, that start cutting the legs out from under activists who never quit, never stop, always work around the clock? How do we create a Green New Deal so that we can survive? And not in 10 years, but now. Now, while we still have a shot. How do we do that? I'm going to give you a couple ideas. I've not been always successful in this, but most of my detractors are even less successful, so I don't really worry too much about that. But I'm going to give you my insights. I think nobody really wants to know how much you know until they know how much you care. So I want to tell you from my vantage point, all of this stuff really matters to me. It really matters to my family. You know, I was talking to the daycare the other day about my son and why we've been on a waiting list for a year plus for what they call a TSS. My son, for those of you who do not know, is autistic. He's on the spectrum. He's a wonderful child, but he needs help. They pay kids coming out of college. You have to have a college degree to be a TSS. They pay them less than $15 an hour to work with kids with autism. So there's a ton of openings and no one to fill them. Of course, they have the funding at $14 an hour. But they don't have the funding if they were to pay them the wage that it would take to bring people into that profession. And it's all fine and well to say, well, you got to do it for the love of the children, but you still got to eat. So the stakes are high for getting the economics correct. You know, we're watching ice melt happen in rapid fashion. We're watching climate change strike all over the place. We're seeing the impacts within migrant communities and folks that live in arid places trying to find places that are more hospitable. We see climate refugees all over the place. That in turn creates a situation where people are fighting over jobs, fighting over food, fighting over this, fighting over that. It's a real near and present danger. These are issues that I think many people can relate to. However, you've got to have the answer for how to solve that. And one of the most important answers is a federal job guarantee. How do you tell people about the federal job guarantee? Well, you tell them it's federally financed and locally administered. You tell them that we're redefining work. In other words, the work that you don't think is valuable, we're redefining, we're making it valuable because it's valuable to the people that receive it. For example, caring for a sick loved one, for raising children, for serving in your local community. Things that aren't profitable, but things that will benefit the community in a big way. We have to reach people where they are. And sometimes that means you've got to shake the shit out of them and smack them around to get their attention. Everybody doesn't wake up with a gentle whisper in the ear. Sorry, I know. I've been doing this a long time. And I started out with sweet nothings. And sweet nothings isn't going to save us from climate change. It's just not. You can have a fantasy all day long. You can pat yourself on the back for being gentle and kind. But it's not going to save us from the coming disaster. You got to ask yourself, what's more important? Do we survive? Or do you get to feel high and mighty for being kind? Kindness is great, but love is truth. So how do we overcome the lies, the embedded friction that people push back with? They don't want to change. Their lives are comfortable, even if we're about to face certain doom. The other thing, you got a lot of people talking about student debt. Why does this matter in these times? Well, for the macro economy, student debt is a huge noose around the neck of the economy. Forget the kids alone. Forget the older people alone. Forget the folks that went back to re-educate themselves during the global financial crisis. It's good for the economy in general. It's also transformative because it removes a debt. It doesn't just give people money. It actually structurally changes society. I hear people say, well, I paid my student debts. So I would throw back at you, so what? You don't want to free the slaves because some had to serve as slaves? So you would rather keep everyone slaves to make up for the people that died slaves? Are you kidding me? Are you that immature? Are you that myopic? Student debt. We're sending our kids out of college with a huge noose around their neck before they have their first kiss. Maybe I'm sounding a little bit Ward and June Cleaver on that, but you get the point. Those kids walking out of there have a mortgage worth of debt sitting on their backs. And for those kids that were lucky enough to win the lottery of life and have parents that have money to pay for them, the inequality continues to grow. So how do you make this case? People are like, hey, I paid my student debt. Nobody else should ever get anything because I didn't. I think it's imperative to show the cause and effect of what a drain student debt is on all businesses, on all industry, on every man, woman, and child, and the intrinsic value education brings to us as a nation, especially in these times where it's going to take our best and brightest to overcome the challenges that our lethargy of the past has brought to the present. We've got to get rid of student debt. And that means we've got to get people to understand what the problem is. And that means they've got to understand how economics works. They've got to understand money creation starts with the federal government spending money into existence, and that it dies when we tax it out of existence at the federal level. And that way we can start understanding that the government can wipe out student debt without any problem at all, other than the fact that these people that have already paid their student debt don't want other people to have anything nice. So we've got to find a way past that, or we stay stuck. We stay stuck. And healthcare, how many people do you know have had cancer or have had some other calamity wipe out all their savings, wipe out everything, take from them their homes, take from them their joy, take from them their families? Humanity was not created to live in a constant state of hell. And who cares if you've got a 60-inch TV? At the end of the day, if you are stressed and stretched and desperate and frustrated, it doesn't matter how big your house is, that stress is real. That heart attack that kills you is real. We've got to make our economy a caring economy. And we've got to sell that to people that don't give a fuck. We've got to find a way to overcome that, because if you don't think they give a fuck about people dying, they certainly aren't going to give a fuck about you yelling at them until you call them a murderer. Now, they're going to hate you, but you better hope that somebody sweeter, softer, and gentler comes and sweeps up the mess so that we get them on board. Because right now, there's got to be a new way of framing these things, because they're not listening. They're not listening. Healthcare is tragic in this country. We are suffering. We've just gotten used to it. We've just gotten used to it. We just don't care enough. Even now, we don't care enough to stay on point and stay focused. Overcome the gaslighting, overcome the group bullshit, the small minds and the yuckity yucks and the slap clap traps. Even now, we don't have enough in us to stop being petty and stay focused. How do we overcome that? How do we overcome it? This is life. And unless we figure that out, we're in deep shit. We're in deep shit. Now, it's important to understand that we don't want to go to war. But it's even more important to understand why we go to war. And it's even more important to see the $750 billion we spend on the military without raising a nickel in taxes. Folks, without raising a nickel in taxes. And yet many in our midst still demand that we've got to pay our fair share to have any kind of domestic programs, any kind of social well-being for the people has got to be paid for in taxes. Why is that? Why is the only thing that doesn't have to be paid for in taxes our stinking bomb squad, our military? Why is it the only thing that we ever think has to be paid for with tax dollars is any service for the American people? Why is that? Can you help me understand why you think the fucking army and the military in general doesn't require a tax hike to add $750 billion to the budget? But yet, the minute I tell you we want to have health care, you're looking for ways to pay for it. It makes no sense. And time is ticking. Time's ticking. Again, I've been following modern monetary theory now for almost a decade. And in that time, it's gone from a small group of people to a much larger group of people. But it's still nowhere near enough people to save us from climate disaster, to save us from unpaid medical bills, and to save us from foreclosure, and to save us from the next recession, to save us from joblessness and instituting a job guarantee, to save us from going into student debt. The MMT community understands this in spades, but it can't get its message to the people whose ears are closed and minds are more closed. So how do you break past it? I say this again, and I'll say it again. How do you break past it? I'm telling you right now, I spent years. Sweet nothings, maybe that reaches a few people, but it doesn't reach most people. Most people don't even hear the words. They do not pay attention. They skip right past your sweet words about how the economy works. And they move right over to yelling about Trump. Or they move right over to yelling about something else. Yelling about automation. Yelling about some other thing that is easily mitigated by state spending on a federal job guarantee and diminishing the work week from 40 to 32, or any number of solutions. How do we make people wake up? How do we get them to care about the things that matter most, which are, how are you going to pay for it? How do we get a united front so that it's not just a hardy few, but it's all the people? How do we get past the cynicism? We know the DNC is going to put its thumb on the scale. We already know this. So how do we out-hustle them? How do we out-progressive them? How do we ensure our needs are met when our own people are busy cutting our legs out from under us? How do we do it? I'm not going to finish this statement because my way may not be your way. And that's okay. Unless you're a Nazi that demands the only way to do things is your way and you try and get in my way for doing it mine. The real deal is we've got to pull together and we've got to overcome the closed-mindedness, the closed ears, the petty, childish bullshit that passes as woke. The claptraps and the Me Too's for the bullshit stories that we tell each other. How do we get past that so that we can actually survive? How do we make this next election count so that we get to those people that are closed off, that aren't hearing us, that don't believe they can do better, that don't see what we're asking for as better because we haven't explained it to them, so they don't know. And of course, their minds are closed. How do we do that? I've given you a few suggestions. It's up to you what you do with it. But I can tell you right now, if we don't get real serious about it real quick, if we don't start making people stand up and get straight, move ahead instead of playing childish high school games, there's not a chance in hell that we're going to survive. And like Greta Thunberg said, you can't make a deal with physics. We're up against a hard deadline, folks. What are you going to do about it? I'm Steve Grumbine with Real Progressives. Have a great day.